Michael Plabey joins us now. He's with HMPlaney Consultants and is an expert on travel and transportation. Michael, this is an interesting one because you and I were just chatting. We're getting information pieces, scraps really, all over the place. Some of it not accurate. How tough is it to piece this thing together with what we're getting so far?
I think it's exceptionally difficult, in particular because this aircraft departed from Paris, crashed as it approached and entered Egyptian airspace. The updates are coming from places such as Turkey, from Greece, and from various points within the Egyptian military, defense agencies, the aviation authority, the airline themselves. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a single voice speaking with authority that provides correct, accurate, and verified information.
It's interesting. And I know a lot of people call you when something like this happens. I talked to a friend of mine today who's a retired air pilot, commercial pilot, and he said one of the pieces that he finds interesting is it comes from the Greek defense minister who said that the plane swerved and then plunged, and he said, you know, as a pilot, he thinks, what happened in that cockpit? What happened to cause that? And he said those are the kinds of things you really want to hone in on for clues, part of the mystery, putting the puzzle together. Do you see that as a critical piece right now?
It is, but we don't even have enough information about that data point. The Greek Defense Ministry told us that the aircraft swerved 90 degrees in one direction, 360 degrees then in the opposite direction. It went from 37,000 feet to 15,000 feet. But what we don't know is, did that data come from primary radar or did it come from secondary surveillance radar? And the difference is very important. Primary radar is what you think of sort of the traditional pings when you see in a movie, the arms sweeping around the screen. That is very inaccurate positional data. Secondary surveillance radar, on the other hand, is really two-way communication with the aircraft. It's what when you hear the term transponder, that's what on the aircraft is communicating with that secondary radar system. And that doesn't just tell you the position of the aircraft, but it gives certain data about the flight number, it gives it about its altitude, its attitude, its airspeed in some cases. So without knowing if that came from the primary, largely ballpark estimate radar, or whether it came from much more accurate secondary radar, we can't even verify what the Greek Defense Ministry has said.
Michael, I want to ask you, one of the things he talked about as a pilot, you've got a checklist, and he said when these things happen, he has his checklist, you know.
Absolutely.
Mechanically, it was okay, the pilot seemed competent, the weather was okay, and then suddenly it starts to look as though it's sinister. What are the things that you look for when you start to get these bits of pieces of information and piece things together?
Well, that's really the first thing is it was clear weather. So unlike some of the other recent tragedies we've seen, we're not evading a storm or flying through a storm. They were over the middle of the Mediterranean, which is essentially blue water. There's no credible threat right there. They're not flying over hostile airspace as what happened in the tragic Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 that was shot down over the Ukraine. You had no other indications of anything external to the aircraft going wrong. So you immediately look at it and say, it had to have been something internal to the aircraft, mechanical or some other force exerting itself across the aircraft.
Insider threats, you talked about that, you know, and I don't think a lot of us think about this, but there's baggage handlers, there's people who do maintenance, there's people who come in with the food, there's so many hands that touch a plane. And what do you do to prevent, if it is an insider, what do you do as an airline or in the air industry to prevent something like that?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, this particular flight, even though it still deals with Egypt, is different than the Metrojet 9268 that was brought down reportedly by a bomb placed by a caterer. In that case, the aircraft was departing from Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. In this case, the aircraft is departing from Charles de Gaulle in France, in Paris. You know that the security at Charles de Gaulle is higher. Paris has been on alert for a number of months now after its own domestic terrorism incidents. The aviation industry in France is generally considered to be at the top of the game on par with any other country in the world. You do routine screenings of all of the employees, of all of the people who have access, and anyone who has ramp access, which means they're outside of the terminal and on the ground or in the maintenance facilities. Those people have special secondary screenings that they have to go to in order to get the proper badge to get on the ground near the airplane. You hope that all of those things are in place and that they are effective. I'm sure there'll be a complete top-to-bottom review of all the personnel around that aircraft, whether they're airline, whether they're airport-related, whether they're a third party. And I know that already they're reviewing security footage. It's been reported that the the BA from France, which is their investigative agency, is already looking at this from the aviation standpoint. And you know that their security agencies, as well as cooperation from the United States, is already on its way, helping to investigate, looking at the passengers on board, looking at the flight crew. Thus far, nothing's been released that says there's any known threat to the aircraft.
All right, Michael, thanks so much for coming in, offering your insights. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, cctv-america.com.